Everybody quiet down, please. My name is Gary Castor. I'm the chair of the Forestry Advisory Council, and I want to call the meeting to order. First, we're going to go through a roll call for our benefit, for who's in attendance in the Advisory Council. And then we're going to talk about introductions and some ground rules on how we're going to conduct this meeting.
All right, I'll begin with roll call. Adam Conway. Eric Roush. Bill Stanley.
Here.
Gary Castor.
Here.
Melvin Yoder.
Bill. Here.
Dr. David Hicks.
Present.
Dan Yossi.
Yes.
Paul Meckley.
Here.
So we have
We're all full quorum.
full board council. We want to go around and have the parties here at the table introduce themselves to you as our guests, and then also have you guests introduce yourself to us. And for the sake of, not to infringe upon you, but if several of you are with a particular organization, maybe just the organization could introduce itself with the representative, something like that, okay? Rather than, okay? So, for the benefit of us, we'll start with you guys. But I want to clarify what the ground rules are. We are here to conduct a business meeting. We're not here to conduct a town hall meeting. There's been time allotted for public meetings for input from the public to be presented to the division and the department as to what your concerns are. And we'll be reviewing those in our meeting today. And you'll also get to see that process as to how that's been assimilated and put together. But so, there's not going to be opportunity or time to have you as individuals speak. You just get to watch us conduct our meeting. And we'll conduct our meeting and go through our deliberations and make whatever reservations or decisions that we would normally do in any regular business meeting. If there's any unruliness, then we're prepared to shut the meeting down for a brief period of time and escort those parties out. So I'm asking you for some courtesy not to cross that line. So, since you are the guest, we'll let you do your introductions. Let's start with the first row.
If I may, I'll just try to introduce a bunch of people first and limit the time for our introductions.
Okay.
I'm Eric Miller with the North Central Ohio Land Conservancy and Mohican Advocates, and many people here are here in support of those two organizations and their positions. And so to save you time so that you can get on with your meeting, we all understand we're not going to be making comments today. We understand that. We're here to listen. And so I would just ask of those who are seated here, if you have shown up in support of those positions as described by North Central Land Conservancy or as described by Mohican Advocates, if you've shown up to show your support for those positions, please don't introduce yourself. Please just raise your hand now and they can see who's here. Then that concludes our introduction. We'll be silent, and anyone else who isn't with us is welcome to stand up and introduce themselves.
Appreciate that.
Our groups won't. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Eric.
I'm not with, sorry.
Go
Jan
ahead.
Kennedy, Mansfield with the Mohican Native Plant Society. Been in existence for over 25 years.
Back in the corner.
Don Merritt, I'm chair of the Ohio chapter of the Sierra Club.
Mark Irvin with the Ohio Society of American Foresters.
I'm Annette McCormick, a lot more than just the North Central Land Conservancy. Just a long time advocate for Mohican.
Does that cover everybody in the audience? Let's see.
I'm Lawrence Kendrick. Nobody special here to represent anyone but myself. I've just been enjoying the State Forest and Park here for about 40 years, and just curious to get updated on what's going on, and glad to have the opportunity to be here.
Got one more here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In addition to being supportive of the land conservancy efforts, my name is Robin Webb, and I'm what you would call a local historian, Mohican historian of the Mohican controversies that have been going on for 23 years. So that has been my effort.
I think we have everybody in the audience now. So let's start. I'm sure they know you, Chad, but we'll start with you anyway.
Yeah, Chad Sanders, forest manager at Mohican Memorial State Forest.
Dan Bolzer, I work at the Columbus office with the Ohio Division of Forestry.
Mel Yoder, I'm with Yoder Lumber Company in Norfolk, Ohio. We're a Sawmill Harvard lumber producer, and we have, we're owner of over 2,000 acres of forest land ourselves, and also we have an agreement with a landowner that owns over 30,000 acres that we do their forest management and so on to that company.
I'm David Hicks. I'm a professor of forestry in the School of Environment and Natural Resources at The Ohio State University. I've been in the position for 26 years. I presently teach silviculture, forest biology, dendrology, successional dynamics of forests, and silviculture, I skipped one, forest ecology and forest ecosystems. My research areas have included the early stand development of forests, forest stand development all the way to the old growth stage. I studied several old growth forests in Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, the places I've worked in West Virginia as well. Again, I'm involved in the council representing forest-based research, and I've done research in this area with oak forest, mixed hardwood forest, hemlock forest, and actually also recently with pine restoration.
I'm Brad Perkins, Executive Director of the Ohio Forestry Association. I'm an invited guest, or the Ohio Forestry Association is an invited guest of the council. I attend their regular meetings. The Ohio Forestry Association is Ohio's oldest conservation association or conservation organization, been around since 1903. We currently act as a association representing the forest products industry. So that's everything from the forest landowners to the loggers, the sawmills, the paper companies, the equipment operators, the professional foresters, the whole gamut from the people growing the trees to the people putting them into their final products. And we have over 600 members.
Greg Guest with the Division of Forestry in the central office, and I do the State Forest Land Management Program.
I'm Dan Yowsey, Research Forester Emeritus with the U.S. Forest Service Research Lab in Delaware, Ohio. I was employed by the Forest Service for 34 years as a research forester. I now teach one course a year at Ohio State University, a capstone course, where the students show their abilities to perform wildlife and forestry practices as they've been taught in other courses. My research was on restoration and maintenance of oak ecosystems in southeastern Ohio and the Appalachian region. As part of the capstone course, we have 1 week field week at OSU Mansfield campus.
As I said, my name is Gary Castor. I'm the chair. My background is I'm a professional forester. I graduated from the best forestry school in the land,
Ohio State?
West Virginia University. I've worked 37 years for American Electric Power, and when I retired, my title was Eco Assets Manager, and I managed 3 big programs. One was a forest management program of over 150,000 acres, both pine and hardwoods, and the recreation program or recreation land that you may know something about down in southeast Ohio was, I managed that. And then I've also gone through the climate change programs for American Electric Power and their carbon sequestration projects on both their lands and lands out other places within the country. So that's my background. I've been on the advisory council through, I think, 4 different chiefs. So I'm a long-time resident, so I've been able to see this division in its ups and downs over the years and see its workings for, a long, long time.
My name's Eric Roush, Operations Manager for Glatfelder. I've been with the company for 30 years. I established a landowner assistance program for private landowners. Currently, I manage our certification program, the Forest Stewardship Council, the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, and the program for the endorsement of forest certification. I'm a professional forester, and I graduated from the Ohio State University.
Bob Boyles, Chief of the Division of Forestry.
I'm Paul Mackling. I'm a graduate of the College of Veterinary Medicine, the Ohio State University. Retired veterinarian. I had clinics in Ashtabula, Erie, and Crawford counties in Pennsylvania. I am a tree farmer. I am the past chairman of the Ohio Tree Farm Committee. I personally own over 700 acres of forest land and cropland in Ashtabula and Perry counties. I also, besides sitting on Forestry Council, serve as chairman of the Ohio Wildlife Council. And I'm a member of Western Reserve Land Conservancy and the Nature Conservancy, and also serve on the Ashtabula Soil and Water Conservation District Board.
My name is Adam Conway. I'm the president of Superior Hardwoods of Ohio. We have 4 mills in Ohio. I grew up in the lumber industry. At least 4 generations. My grandfather was the Emmett Conway Sr. If some of you conservationists, preservationists certainly know his history and legacy. In 1940, he was a forest ranger for the Zaleski State Forest. In 1949, he did a physical inventory of our existing state forest and set the baselines for timber harvest and inventory levels at that time. And my father was in the business in the 1970s, and then I came back in the 1990s. We own privately over 5,000 acres here in the state of Ohio that we manage ourselves. We have 10 foresters on staff who work with landowners and help them set inventories, set goals, set long-term objectives for their own private lands. And then one of our properties is a 2,500 acre property that we went in with the Division of Wildlife to set up as public hunting grounds down the Richland State Forest in southeastern Ohio. So all of our activities primarily southeastern Ohio graduate of Ohio State University, studied international economics, and continue to this day working with timber and land management around the world.
John Mueller, Division of Forestry and District Manager in Northwest Ohio.
Good afternoon. I'm Bill Stanley with the Nature Conservancy. I want to thank you guys for your interest in what's going on here, and also for information that people provided me some information about history of the Mohican and some of your concerns. I appreciate that very much. I also want to thank the members. We have one at least here, and more, I'm sure. I've been at the Nature Conservancy for about 18 years. Been in Ohio working here for about 8.5. My background actually started in forest science and climate change. And here in Ohio, I manage a team that we own and manage about 20,000 acres throughout the state, a lot in southern Ohio at edge of Appalachia Preserve. Actually grew up in the forest in East Tennessee. This area reminds me some of that area. It's a beautiful place. My background in terms of education, I have a degree in environmental science from the University of Virginia and a Master in Forest Science from Yale University. I studied ecology and forest science at those schools, and am really appreciative of being on this advisory council. And my role here in the advisory council is, of course, to represent the Nature Conservancy on our interests, but also recreation. So that's something I will take a kind of special eye toward with the Mohican and the interest in recreational benefits of this forest.
Liz Roberto, I'm with the Division of Forestry.
Correction, or in addition to the minutes, is we're gonna talk about the minutes of the last meeting that we had at the Paul Bunyan Show.
Correct, and those were all electronically approved.
They're all approved.
Yes.
Just wanted to validate that in this minutes of this meeting. Next on the agenda is the end of position term. Bob, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, we have 2 members that their terms are expiring as of February 27th next year. And those are Bill Stanley and David Hicks, so just as a reminder that those are coming up.
Get your applications in if you're interested.
Okay, next is the Forestry Advisory Council Administrative Rules.
So I distributed 2 draft rule language for the Forest Advisory Council. These are in the Ohio Administrative Code. These are up for 5-year rule review. So if you take a look through those, we are proposing to go with no changes and resubmit them as is. But if you have comments or additions, just let us know. They have to do with public meeting, the sunshine rule, and the minutes how they're kept.
So will we vote on these after any comments or
Right.
do it electronically or?
Yeah, we can do it electronically, so if you have comments, you can just email them, and I can collect them.
Next on our agenda is the Mohican proposed plan presentation, and that's Chad, that's you.
Liz, could I get you to take that cap off?
Yes.
Just a short presentation of the actual proposal, the Restoring Native Hardwoods Initiative, for the benefit of everyone here. After I conclude, Bob's gonna be talking about the public review process and input process and then the comments received and all that. But so my part here is to just review the plan as presented in the draft stage. Started with just a basic slide about ODNR, and most people are aware that ODNR is more than several divisions, several land holding divisions. There's our mission statement there that you can see, and 37% of ODNR basically is a state forest system. But I guess the point of this slide is that everybody has different views and philosophies and things that they care about, and I think ODNR, you can find a place in ODNR for your views. There's a lot of land there that represents recreation interests, but also hunting, developed recreation, dispersed recreation, and quite a few acres of let nature take its course type of management. So really about 2/3 there. From the wildlife areas around to the parks and the nature preserves of passive management, or very little, if any, timber harvesting. And then I just like to highlight a little bit, in the red there represents about 10% of state forest acres that we voluntarily set aside as high conservation value forests. So basically the other part of the blue is the only lands really where there's any sort of intensive management.
What do you mean by high conservation value
forest? That's an FSC term. It basically would be land areas where sort of let nature take its course here. It has values, high conservation values that would maybe negatively impacted, you know, if those were lost. So those are land areas that, you know, about all the forests have some HCBF. Mohican has quite a bit.
So
Yeah,
Chad,
good
on
question.
those, is your goal there to keep managing for the high conservation values that you've identified? Is that
Yeah, the management in those is to enhance or restore those high conservation values, absolutely.
Chad,
Yes.
on that HCV, high value conservation lands, that's required by your certification, right?
Yes.
To have that, but when we did our inventory in the most recent past, several years ago, were those type of lands and those values identified through that inventory?
They were. In fact, 2010 was when we identified all of the HCBF on all our state forests, and that was a public input process. Well, we had a big meeting in Columbus and people came, and so we identified what we thought was HCBF, but then the public and all kinds of groups came and weighed in on where those areas are, yes.
And this would not be a true statement, or would be a true statement, that almost all state forests have some portion of that, or contribute to that 10%?
Certainly the larger forests do, absolutely, which are the southern Ohio 8 or 10 larger forests down there. Most of our land base is in those 8 or 10 forests, yeah, absolutely.
So the diversity, and that's probably not the right one, distribution of that is
Yeah, correct.
wherever the forests are located, okay.
That's right. Okay, so jumping into just to review the proposal, we started with the intent of this proposal was really three things that was sort of our guiding principles. One is probably the most sensitive and special feature at the Mohican area is the Clear Fork River, and so whatever we do, the intent is to protect the Clear Fork River or even add additional protections in the land surrounding it. Secondly, we really had the eye to honor the recommendations of the ad hoc committee from the late 1990s. I'll go over those here in just a minute. And then also we have a 5-year plan for our state forests that was put in place in 2015. That was a publicly affirmed plan, several open houses for that plan, lots of input from other expert opinion on that plan, and so we're trying to make Mohican sort of comply with that current plan while also honoring those recommendations and then protecting the Clear Fork River. That's kind of the intent. For those who may not know what those recommendations from the ad hoc plan were, some of you know very well, there was 4. The first is a large core of mature forest. This is a recommendation just for here at Mohican, just to be clear. Native plant and animal diversity, low impact recreation, and an education and demonstration about forest ecosystems and their management. So the intent is to meet those 4 objectives. From just to review the ad hoc plan further, Mohican was divided into 3 zones at that time. An old growth zone, a mature forest with single tree selection zone, and then a demonstration. So A, B, and C, those 3 zones. And that's roughly how it breaks out acres wise, and then the percentages there for your benefit. This is the map of where those zones were located. Tried to keep the colors consistent here, so the pink, the pink is the A zone. The yellow is the B, mature forest with single tree selection management, and then the 4 green areas are the demonstration areas. I'll just find those here in just a minute. Looking at this plan, there was just some issues to try to match it to our current plan, but also to meet the intent of our certification program. There's been some updated data since the 90s that we want to take advantage of. There's some difficulties with the map that some adjustments need to be made. If I just go back one slide, I don't want to lose you here, but I'm going backwards. But maybe you can see some areas up in the top right corner where the zone is not exactly correct. Some lands that we've purchased or lands that we've gotten rid of in the past. And then matching some of those boundary lines to the topography or the land feature that actually exists there was a desire. Kind of the big one is the third one down is the meeting the objective 2 of the ad hoc plan, and that's the native plant and animal diversity. And that has to do with, you know, the acreage of pine plantations being underestimated. And really can't fault the committee on that at that time. We didn't have GIS or remote sensing, we had paper files and records, and going from those, that's what their estimates were based off of those records. But we have technology now that we can be real precise on how many acres are in those areas. So just stay on this pine issue here. If there's an aerial photograph of Mohican, the green in the aerial photograph would be the pine plantations. It equals about 40% of the state forest, and I think the ad hoc committee, they recognize that. They recognize that I just a quote from the plan there, we recognize that the large pine tend to complicate the objective of providing for native plant and animal diversity. In other words, I think everybody's recognized that there is relatively lower ecological value in those plantations. I'm not saying that there's not any. I'm just saying relative to the native hardwood forests that surround them, certainly a difference in plant and animal diversity in those areas. So looking at that pine question, we start comparing and going through some of our decision processes. We look at Mohican's forest composition. This is by major forest types, not necessarily species. There's many more species of trees in those broad forest types, but we certainly have more than our fair share of these artificial pine plantations, 40%. The intent, I think that one of the objectives of this initiative is if we can reduce the size of that purple slice of the pie. I know the labels are hard to read, I apologize. So the purple area would be the 40% pine plantation. We think if that's reduced somewhat, maybe some of those areas will fold into the green area of oak hickory forest eventually, or certainly the maple beech forest, where, you know, we would definitely say that on the right-hand side of the pie there's much more biodiversity than on the left-hand side.
Hey, I'm sorry, Chad.
Yes.
When you show Ohio forest composition, that's current composition, or was
Yes.
that historical? Do we know what, like, the historical composition would have been, like, pre-settlement, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, probably a little bit more of that oak hickory component into those mesic components for sure.
And then in this region, you would expect 40% pines. I mean, what?
Well, and those 40% pines, those are farm fields that were once hardwood forests. You know, there was a conversion that took place at the turn of the century with those areas. Those areas were cleared for farming.
But there were some pines found in this region.
There is some native white pine, quite a bit in the gorge and some of the steep drainages, and so that's not reflected in that number.
Okay.
This is just the plantations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chad, on those plantations,
Yes.
so you're getting to them.
Okay.
Go ahead,
You want me
go to
to
the
keep
next
going?
slide.
Okay, fair enough. Just to review the historical land use of those pine plantations was marginal farming, and you can see some of the efforts that folks went through back in the day to try to stop the soil erosion. So again, kind of from the beginning, those were native hardwood forests that were cleared for farming or grazing. There was really marginal practices, marginal, ability to use those lands, and there was some big erosion problems. And so in the 30s through the 50s and into the 60s, those areas were planted to white pine and red pine in plantations. What we're advocating in this initiative is to slowly start converting some of those areas back to what it was originally, which was native hardwood forest.
In those plantings, what was the original spacing, do you know? What was the spacing, stocking per acre?
Most of the files I've read 6 by 6, so it'd be
6 by
like
6.
888 trees per acre. Yeah. Not all, some of them are say 7 by 7, but a lot of 6 by 6. Just a few photos to try to illustrate what we've been talking about. So here's a stand of white pine that's near 60 years old with, again, relatively low biodiversity. I want to try not to be dogmatic in my language, but relatively low biodiversity. the understory is pretty devoid of plants, and therefore limited value to a host of wildlife species. And the reason is that we believe is because of the sunlight. There's a complete crown closure on those stands, very little sunlight hitting the forest floor. And I know in some of the tours that I've been on a real nice sunny day, you can see that, because everything's lit up with diffuse sunlight, but you can see the small patches of direct sunlight hitting the ground. There's very few of them, so there's very few very little direct sunlight that's hitting the forest floor. And consequently, you have this understory that's pretty devoid of things. Now, interestingly, there's hardwood species present throughout these stands, and you can find that evidence throughout of young seedlings. The hardwood seedlings are dispersed by, obviously, weather, and of course with oak seedlings it'd be birds and mammals. But I can be way out in the interior of some of these places and find a little oak seedling, and you think, well, there's no oak trees around, how'd they get here? So, it's the squirrels and blue jays moving that stuff. It's fascinating. And then, even you find a few times you'll find some advanced regen in the pine, and here's one where, we dug around this thing, and the root collar on that little oak seedling is probably over 1 inch in diameter. It tells me that thing's been there for years and years. Again, just hanging on because of the complete crown closure. But Mohican has a long track record of forest management, going back since the forest has been here, and so I can go back through the records and recreate and find out what has happened on these places. And so here's a stand that has been thinned twice, once in 1975, a third row thinning, and then again in 2006. So you can see the difference in the stand from where we started with. You have a much more open crown, a much higher ability for sunlight to reach the forest floor, and you can see that flush of understory that's developing there. Not only in herbaceous vegetation, but in trees, which is what we want. So there's 10 or 15 at least different hardwood species there. So there's a forest that had essentially one species of tree, now has 14 or 15 different species of trees growing under it, with herbaceous, with some open canopies. And so there's some biodiversity and structural diversity as well. Carry that forward to here's another example. And by the way, for you that's been on a tour with me, these are all the same tour stops that we've been to. So you've been to these areas. A stand that's been thinned 3 times. Those hardwood trees are 40 to 50 feet tall, and I would call this stand transitioning. It's now no longer a pine plantation, but it's transitioned to more of a hardwood forest, or folding into the forest matrix that's around it. So you have these disturbed areas that have been chronically disturbed. That chronic disturbance has been maintained through that plantation, so it's still in that state. And by interrupting the trajectory of that pathway through a thinning, it starts to set it on a different pathway towards a hardwood forest.
So Chad, this looks like you're thinking this is successful, right?
Yeah,
So I'm curious about the way invasive species were managed. Is that a problem you're concerned about? How's that? Was that a problem at these sites, or is it a problem at other sites?
If I go back, certainly this site here has invasive species. It was thinned in 2006. It's by no means dominant, but it is fairly prevalent along the trails and the edges and some of the more open areas. And we have, in fact, the constituents have made that comment too, and we're going to go through the invasives comment here just a minute in detail. Okay, so if I take all that and we used an interdisciplinary approach within our division. Of a lot of people looked at this and a lot of different backgrounds to zone this thing that meets the 4 goals of the ad hoc committee, but also tries to take an account of this biodiversity question with these pine plantations. And here's the zones that we came up with. The first 2 are high conservation value for us. The next 2 are, the 3A is basically the Pine Run area, which is a protected zone around that stream side. 3B is the mature forest, single tree selection, and then the demonstration areas. And I'll have some comparisons here in just a minute. going through this process of rezoning, there's a number of considerations made. I won't go through all those in detail, but just to let you know, this is we did our homework slide. So you can see the number of things that we took into consideration as we went through this. Try to comply with, the goals from for forest statewide, our 2010 statewide forest action plan. Also meeting the goals of the Division of Forestry 5-year plan. We reviewed the science. We have sought expert opinion. We reviewed Nature Serve Explorer. We talked to Dr. Lewis Iverson, who's a climatologist here in Ohio that has fantastic data sets on these climate change models and how that affects white pine and red pine. And then also the locations of rare, threatened, and endangered species from the Natural Heritage Database and other data sets. So here's the map of what our proposed zones look like now. The pink would be the high conservation value forest, essentially let nature take its course, or a more passive, hands-off type of approach to those areas. They also very well coincide with all of the areas of the old forests that we can find on Mohican. So we kind of started with there. Where's the old forests at Mohican? That's where those pink areas are. And they also coincide with where concentrations of sensitive species are. Most of the sensitive species at Mohican congregate right along the Clear Fork River. You can see that in the top of the slide, the river there. That's where all the concentrations that we have data for are. And so we felt important to protect the Clear Fork River. We actually expanded that no management zone all along that river compared to the initial map. If I back up to, might be helpful to just back up briefly to the first map. So just again, look at the river. There is some areas of yellow along the river that we changed to a more protected zone. Up on the left-hand corner is one example. Probably the most striking difference is the southern part of the forest where the yellow is there on the map used to be pink as an old growth zone. But looking at what's actually on the ground, there's been a lot of disturbance history there. There's a lot of farm fields there. There's a lot of old farming. There's a lot of logging, the past logging practices. And we felt that probably fits in better areas that actually have old forests now. So, but remember, the yellow area is mature forest with uneven age management. So it would still the intent of that zone is to grow into mature forest. And then the 4 green areas more or less stay the same.
To Chad?
Yes.
The big light pink area
Thank you. I didn't mention it. Yep.
in the former map was yellow.
Yes. So in the former map, the light pink area was yellow, which meant mature hardwood forest with uneven age management. Looking at what's actually there, that's 80% pine plantation in that light pink area. It's very difficult to do uneven age management through that 800 acres of pine plantation. So what we're calling it now is a high conservation value restoration zone, which means the intent of that would be to fold into the rest of the pink. So that once the hardwood gets established in there through thinning, the intent is to let that transition to high conservation value forest. That answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Chad, can I ask, what's the difference in practice? The designation has changed, but in practice, what would you have done with the old management compared to the new management in that light pink
I have
area?
a slide on that.
Okay.
Hang on one second on it.
Just comparison.
Okay, so comparison of acreages, roughly the ad hoc zones percentage-wise are on the left, and the proposed zones are on the right. Just as a reminder, on the left, the A is basically no management, the B is mature forest, uneven age management, and the C is demonstration. So on the right, the upper right quadrant, basically a third, is high conservation value forest. That is the set aside area. The high conservation restoration, the goal is that is to fold that in to that other pink. So that's roughly 48% or 47% So roughly similar percentage-wise, other than that's more of trying to manage some of those pine plantations. The yellow, pretty much the same sort of management, mature forest single tree selection that gets reduced a little bit in this scenario. And then the demonstration area went from 16% to 18%. And then those couple small zones, that just is zones for, you know, the youth camp area, the office area, the parking lots, those kind of things to take those acres out. Here's the comparison, Bill, to answer your question of what the management is, and I know it's difficult to read because of the size, we're trying to get a lot of things on one slide. In the A zone of the ad hoc, I mean, I'm starting at the top left, that zone is, the language is it's been to be allowed to mature, there's no harvesting disturbance, and there's no salvage harvesting. There's the goal to minimize treatment of invasives and to promote late successional habitat. So what we would say on ours is very similar, allowed to mature, no harvesting disturbance, but we do allow for salvage logging in rare circumstances. We'll define that here in a minute. But there's a more proactive treatment with invasives, and then it's to mature to late successional habitat. The same goes for the restoration area, except the activity would be to promote the high conservation values, and that would be pine thinning would be allowed in that. The B zone on the left and the 3B on the right are essentially the same, uneven age management. Pine thinning is allowed in the ad hoc plan. I just want to mention some of that because there is management allowed in the ad hoc plan, including uneven age management and pine thinning in that B area. And that would be essentially the same definition in the 3B area. And then in the C, again, very similar, promote public awareness of forest management through demonstration. The ad hoc plan's language is that a full range of silviculture from crop tree release and thinning all the way to clear cutting would be allowed in that. We essentially is the same thing, and that would be the goal there, early and mid-successional habitats. That's the language from the ad hoc plan.
Okay, a couple questions.
Yeah.
One, 3B and the new one, it's called mature forest here. I've got a version that calls it aesthetic. What do you call it? Aesthetic area.
Aesthetic area, yeah.
Is that same thing? So that describes that, it's the same thing.
It's the same thing. It should say aesthetic area, actually. Yeah, I think that's our name for aesthetic areas.
Okay, and then it looks like to me like so basically with the pink zone here that was mature forest and now it's moving into 1D, went from B to 1D, right?
Yes.
So the difference is then you have pine thinning to promote hardwood generation versus pine thinning to restore native hardwood. That sounds pretty similar. So is it really different? What's different?
The difference is before it was an uneven age management zone. But looking at what's on the ground, it's 800 acres of pine plantation planted in rows. What I'm suggesting it'd be very difficult to do uneven age management in there rather than just pine thinning.
Okay.
Dr. Hicks, pine plantation, would you be able to do uneven age management effectively?
Doesn't make any sense. I mean, you wouldn't do group or single tree selection with plantation.
Just a couple more slides, I'm almost done. Acres wise, this is the comparison of the acres. Again, zone A is now the 1A and 1D, the zone B, but some differences on the map which I've highlighted before. So this is my final slide. Just, you know, again, we just see some benefits here, mostly relating to that restoring and promoting native biodiversity. We think through the pine plantations, we think that through small-scale periodic thinnings of those pine plantations will enhance and promote hardwood forest regeneration underneath those. By getting those to start the transition would be a net benefit to wildlife. We've also, you know, be able to deal with some forest health issues if should we have them, but there's no goal to go after those things. It's just we have that ability now, and then, you know, it's a more precise approach to what the forest condition is on the ground. With that, That's my final slide.
Chad, get this right. Zone 1A.
Back up.
That's right here too.
Yes.
It's okay, you're okay. The, that's not the one I'm after. I'm after the, your zone here is going to permit single tree management, so selection management,
Yes.
and that's 3B.
3B, the yellow, yes.
And do we have an idea of, describe what trees are going to be taken? Would be identified in that single tree selection?
Not at this point, it's just in the planning stages, but we think it, makes sense to promote an uneven age mature hardwood forest down in that area. But we don't have, anything identified.
You would be, but your harvesting would be determined by a Q factor and negative exponential curve of diameter distributions.
Yeah, in fact, actually, there is some pine plantations down in that area that I would probably want to focus on just the thinning of those rather than doing uneven age management for a while. I guess it's not on the radar, is what I'm saying.
Okay, well, I'm trying to mesh single tree management with single tree selection in my brain, okay?
Okay, yeah,
Okay.
I mean, single tree selection is what I mean to say. Is that what you're asking?
So I was trying to picture what the candidates would be that would be marked for removal.
Yeah.
You don't have any idea what they would, can you describe them? No?
Well, I would describe it as the technical definition of uneven age management of promoting 3 or more age classes through there and trying to create.
You'd be cutting throughout the distribution size classes.
That's right.
So it's not just the biggest and the largest.
Oh, no.
It's
no.
that and probably all other diameters.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yep.
And the overall objective is to manage it for a mature state, to move in to high conservation value.
Eventually, that sounds like you're trying to move it into kind of an old growth structure.
Mature.
Yeah, over time, take a lot of trees. Yeah. Which is more, older age classes than was in the previous version, it sounds like, from the description of mature forest. HEVF is more mature. Sounds like. Chad, I just, in listening to folks who've been sending me information, I think a lot of the concerns have to do with the yellow area there, where a lot of that was in what was called old growth zone A.
Mm-hmm.
That's been a lot of the concern, and I'm curious about how that land is used by the public. Do they have access to that? Is that used for recreation?
Which part?
The
yellow one?
Yellow.
Yeah, so kind of in
Nothing
broad,
wrong with yellow does.
yeah, kind of in broad terms, the southern part of the forest is where the majority of our horse trail system is, in that part of the forest. From 97, which is kind of east-west, right in the middle of the map, State Route 97 going north, is where it's more hiking trails, picnic sites, and the mountain bike trail. We thought, looking at the data of what's actually there, the yellow area is mostly hardwood forest, which makes better sense for uneven age management. And that where it was yellow north of 97 is mostly pine plantation, which makes better sense for just pine thinning to convert it over to high conservation value forest. So it was based on what's actually there, and north of 97 probably has a lot more use. I mean, that's where, like, you know, people go to the covered bridge, people are at the campground, people get away from those campgrounds kind of in that general local area. So there's a tremendous amount of use there in the pink. And so we think the long-term goal there is, you know, high conservation value forest is probably a good idea there. But there's, in other words, there's no old growth in that yellow.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea was that it would become old growth, right?
Yeah.
Is there a major, have you heard a lot of concern about is it aesthetics, or is it more of, I guess, kind of losing the idea of old growth, or what's been the concern from your meetings that you've heard from the public? Have you heard that same concern?
We'll get through those individual
You're gonna go through that,
comments,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
So
Just trying to get a handle on what the concerns are
Right.
exactly.
So that, I mean, that's kind of just covering, just to remind everybody what the plan's about. Back over to you, Bob. Forget it.
I'm gonna ask a different question.
From the meeting.
That zone, if we go to the ad hoc group map,
You put it to the ad hoc group map, we can, the RNHI group over on the other one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So now that compares both of them.
Right.
Okay.
so in the new zoning, the green area, which was C, in your new zoning, it's slightly larger than it was previously under the ad hoc. But that zone was demonstration forest,
Yes.
right? Where you conducted harvesting and management. Yes?
In recent history, yes, but there's harvesting and management on the whole thing. You know, if you go back to the 80s, 90s, 70s.
Prior to the ad hoc
Correct.
plan, okay? So my question is, what's been your feedback from the public, or your input as to that type of management that, on that particular zone?
In the green.
Yeah.
So of the 4 green areas, the one to the north has had the most activity, kind of right in the north in the dead center.
Mhm.
It's called the Discovery Forest. There's 7 or 8 different signs out through there, different silviculture practices. There's American chestnut plantation in there. There's a parking lot and a trail system. Generally good feedback there, but also some negative as well. So that's where we do have some invasives in there, and we do get some criticism on, you know, there's an 8-acre clear cut in there, and as part of this demonstration trail that we've had comments about that. But there's also lots of people that use that either make no comment or have positive. But we do take, you know, like the joint vocational school out there. We've taken a bunch of different students and groups out there. It's a good place to show different practices, yes.
When was that clear cut installed?
2004.
What are the major invasive species?
Bush honeysuckle primarily.
Is it hampered hardwood regeneration?
No, I mean, hardwood regeneration is, you know, is coming along fine. There's about 13 species there, but there is an understory of bush honeysuckle there that we're gonna treat.
Follow-up question on the demonstration area. The ad hoc plan preceded certification, right?
Correct.
And how is the demonstration area viewed under your FSC or SFI? Does it benefit that certification? Is it neutral one way or the other, or?
Does it benefit the certification, or how does the certification view that?
The fact that we're doing demonstration management or demonstration harvest out there, does that enhance the way your FSC certification audits are being viewed?
They often give us, you know, they have in the past, not this past year, but in a couple previous years, that we exceed the standard in those areas on education and demonstration. So it greatly helps our certification
Enhances it.
to have forest management demonstration areas.
Yeah, that was,
Yeah, what, you have a 2020 plan, and what's the timeline from, like, where's the first implementation and then successive after that?
How it's gonna be implemented on the ground. So what we have proposed now is just a change in our plan, and we haven't determined, you know, how the implementation from year to year on how this would be implemented. We have another process for that annual work plan. So every year we write an annual work plan of what we propose to do. But what we've been very clear in the media and with tours and groups is that we would like to do no more than 20 to 40 acres of pine thinning a year. Now, we haven't written that into our plan. We envision that, writing that in our annual work plans each year. But that's an opportunity that we could maybe codify that somehow a little bit more, 20 to 40 acres. So just the math on it, there's 1,800 acres of pine plantations out of the 4,600 acre forest. So 20 to 40 acres of pine thinning a year is a, you know, 2% of that number.
Yeah, and at that rate, you're going to be able to better understand your impact, you know, at a slower rate, instead of making it drastic.
My own feeling is that we should put the 20 to 40 acres, if we do that kind of thing a year, in the 4 green areas, in the demonstration areas, at least for quite a while, so people can see it, can understand it, see if it works, you know, before we go into any of these other areas that are more high use of.
so you would monitor that, see how it's working out, see if you need to make any changes.
That's the intent,
Yeah.
yeah. And that, you know, we'll talk about that here in a minute with some of the comments.
So, with your examples of thinning and hardwood regeneration, you had pictures. It looked like the best areas were the areas you'd had 3 different thinnings. Of course, that makes sense, you got more area for hardwoods to come in. So does that 20 to 40 acres include rethinning of already thin stands?
It would, and we put into our annual work plan this year, one area that's been thinned multiple times, and then one area that hasn't. It would just be kind of it's probably been 3rd row thinned back in, you know, the 70s, but this will be the first real thinning in it. The other one has been thinned multiple times, and the idea would be take the rest off. But given the feedback, I think we'd be ahead to stay in those areas that never been first time thinned. You know, just those kind of dog hair stands where it's really devoid understory. If we can at least get some of those thin and getting those transitioned, I think we'd be ahead for a while.
Down in Kentucky, on the national forest down there, they're having issues with white pines coming in and invading their hardwood stands as non-native invasive species. Do you see in your other forest management areas that you have white pine coming in to those as volunteers?
Not that I've noticed, really. I mean, we have some pretty mature forests that, you know, the understory looks as you would expect.
Well, this would have to be,
Yeah.
would have to be in one of the areas that you've managed.
Greg can speak to that, but we've had a few white pine stands that we've taken off down south that actually, we had some regeneration in those stands.
Yeah, you see, we've
But it's
seen
very rare. It has
spotty.
to be done right at the exact
Yeah.
perfect storm for it to
Okay,
happen.
okay, because I know down in Kentucky, they're having issues with the white pine, limiting their hardwood regeneration.
And, I mean, I'm somewhat familiar with that.
That's right, you're from Kentucky, that's right.
We don't have,
The other school.
I mean, they have it invading, even areas they don't manage on the upper parts of the slope from the pines from the gorges, and we don't really see that kind of invasion. Generally, when you do see it, it doesn't do very well. You can count the rings on it, it's 30 years old and 10 feet tall, or 40 years old and 10 feet tall.
So that's not an issue here.
And spotty, so, yeah, it's not.
In an unthinned area, a virgin area, plantation, that you want,
Virgin plantation?
virgin plantation, that you want to go in and do a thinning, what kind of basal area are we talking? We're talking 6 by 6 or 7 by 7 spacing, but what would be your estimate of the current basal area today?
220 to 250.
Okay, so when you talk about thinning, give me the basal area number then.
I think we want to not take more than a third of the basal area out, so take it down to, 150, 160, somewhere in that range.
And in a physical
140.
way of how's that gonna be done? Row by every other row?
No,
or
no,
it's
low.
gonna be
Thinning
throughout?
from below.
Thinning
Yeah.
from below, okay.
Cut the length.
What kind of equipment?
Cut the length equipment, the mechanized.
Now, can I switch gears and get off the pine a minute?
Can I ask one more question? Just out of curiosity, why at that level? What's the decision? I mean, I know you can change things if it doesn't work out, but what's the rationale on not cutting more?
Yeah,
or cutting
well,
less?
I think we need to evaluate it and try out a few different ones to see what we think, but kind of what I'm thinking now is that, a lot of people have given me thoughts. I mean, thinning's a real art, and if you thin it too hard, you risk wind throw, and so we don't want that. If you thin it too light, you don't get enough sunlight to get regeneration. So there's a sweet spot in there. I'm not sure I know exactly what that sweet spot, but where I've seen that it's been done, where it's a 140, 120 kind of at the low end to 160 basal area. So I've been kind of shooting for kind of that 140, 150 basal area.
So looking at what others have done and what's worked.
Yeah, or what's been done here at Mohican.
What's been done here, okay.
Yeah.
Well, you had that picture up there of the one stand you thought had done a third row thinning to it, which would be removing 33%.
Yep.
And it had no regeneration in there of any kind.
Yeah, well, the crown's just closed, quickly, so
So they have to have another thinning.
so there might be a second periodic thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking maybe,
But that third row thing was done really early on.
Yeah, it was done at like age 16 or
Yeah.
something,
Oh,
so
okay.
Christmas
It
tree
wasn't
size.
a recent third row thinning where if you did it now, you would get some regeneration.
okay.
But that wasn't designed to get regeneration, it was designed to promote
Improve growth.
growth. But at AEP, we converted a lot of our pine plantations to hardwood, but we didn't have the age or that type of basal area. But we probably had 140, 150 square feet of basal area, went down to 90, and that gave us the hardwoods that we wanted. So I'm just sharing that.
So from a pure ecology perspective, just one more comment. If you're doing the thinning and you're getting hardwood regeneration, to me that tells me that that's probably historically what was on that site. That's what those soils support. Even with the pine, needles that have changed the soil acidity and things like that. If you're getting hardwoods back, to me that's a good indication that's probably what was there pre-settlement. So, I mean, that's just, if you weren't getting it regeneration, then I'd be kind of like, well, it's hard to know what was there before. But since you're getting that kind of regeneration, to me that suggests that's kind of what belongs there in a more mature forest.
Yeah, and if I get to that one picture just like this, of the 1,800 acres of plantations, maybe 30% of them are in this kind of structural condition of, pretty devoid of an understory. So that's where I'm saying we might be ahead to sort of, think about those initially rather than, these kind of areas that are already starting to transition. So, those are on a trajectory that's good at this point. The trajectory here, I think, is more that we can do some benefit there.
So Chad, what do you think the live crown ratio is on the dense?
Oh, it's 5 to 10%.
Well, it should never, you should never be allowed to go below 20%.
Yeah.
You're just hanging on.
I'm gonna switch off the pine a minute. Your zone 3A, reading this in your initiative, that's 156 acres long pine run. And there's been some input, comments and concern about pine run.
Yeah, we'll get to that in comment.
In comment.
We can discuss it now.
you got, is the comment section coming next?
Yes, we're gonna go through all those comments here individually. One of them's about high run. Well, I mean, multiple people have commented on that issue. We'll give you some thoughts there.
All right, go ahead. Wait till we do that. Okay, so let's switch now, if you're done, to the outreach
Outreach
process.
process, yeah, sure. I think most of you are aware of what that process is, but I will go through it. When we do planning on state forests, we have the State Forest Action Plan, so that's the hierarchy, the overarching document that sets the stage for all of our forest planning. And that deals with all the forests in the state, across the state. It's a rather lengthy process at the end of April, so we started stakeholder outreach at that time. Actually, May through August. August, we held 5 open houses around the state. The first one was held here at Mohican on the 21st, and the last one at Maumee on the 29th. So we take the input in from those open houses, evaluate those. We usually give people 30 days after the open houses to submit comments. This year we had, which we'll see, one of the requests was to extend the comment period, so we extended it another 30 days. Actually, it ended up, after the last open house to when we closed the comment period, was about 77 days. Once we receive that amount of public input, then we have an integration team within the Division of Forestry. It's composed of all the section heads within the division, Urban Forestry, Service Forestry, State Forest, Fire. Everybody sits, all the leaders of the division sit on the integration team. We throw out all the public input on the table. We compile that public input, try to sort through it, come up with recommendations. Then those recommendations are then presented to this body, the Forest Advisory Council, for your input and recommendation as well. So that's how the entire process works. That doesn't mean that we close our input off at any given time. We're open for input at any time. Anybody, we have an open door policy. Anybody can come in and talk to us at any time. We take concerns and criticisms and attaboys as well all year long. But for the planning purposes, we have to have a certain amount of deadlines and make a certain amount of decisions in order to move forward. So with that, that's the overall process, Gary. And if you want, we'll jump right into the comments.
The integration, yeah.
So the integration committee has actually compiled, you have 2 sheets in front of you. The first one is the Restoring Native Hardwoods Initiative, Mohican State Forest Stakeholder consultations for 2.5 months, plus or minus. You see the title on it there. The first page we've listed all the people that have supported what we've put out. And if you notice,
Liz, I got it.
You got your information, Mel? Okay, and then there's another document, looks like this. It has a summary of the consultation process, list of concerns. This is what the integration committee puts together. And if the 2 documents go together, the first document I talked about, if you look on the far right-hand column, you see a concern column. And those concerns relate to the concerns on the other document, 1 through 11, from the integration committee. So the first page of the first document is all the support people. You see the concern is number 1 on the subsequent document that's supportive of the plan. Second page is the stakeholders that had issues with something, and if you look at the concerns on the right-hand column, you can see who the people were and what their concerns were. and they're listed on the right-hand column. And one is, there's one at the bottom of that page, the OEC, which was somewhat supported and somewhat against. Then the last page is the summation of the extended 30-day period. First part of the page are those that are listed as number one concerns or supported. The second part of the page are the issues that, where people had some concerns, and those concerns are listed. So you can review that page at your leisure, but it's just a listing of the people and what their concerns are. The more important document is the document from the Integration Committee, and that's the second document. If you want to go yet, we can go through each of these if that's what you would like to do, Gary. And
Yeah,
we can kind of talk our way through all these.
Yes.
Okay. Number one is, the concern number one was support. These were groups and individuals that were supportive of our plan. So that's pretty straightforward. Number two, which relates to a concern with people with philosophically driven concerns. People that just don't believe that we need to be doing management of Mohican. It's you know, a let nature take its course type approach to management. You can see the integration team's response. I don't think I need to read it to you, but the response was, you know, it's a state forest. It's not a state park or natural area. Our mission is slightly different, and we feel there are benefits to managing this land base. So that's a response for the integration committee. Number three, a lot of, initially, early on, there was a lot of input saying the concern is the comment period was too short. And it varied from, people felt it needed to be another 30 days or up to 6 months. So we took care of that, we extended it 30 days. So actually we went out to November 6th and we had 77 days of comment period. So really they didn't recommend it, just giving you a response to that concern. Concern number four, negative impact to tourism. You can read the response, but we've done outreach to the local community with tourism interests, local trail groups, volunteer groups, sportsmen's groups. We've received support letters, as you can go back to the first document and see who did support the plan in the tourism sectors, the people that make up the tourism here at Mohican. And there is a document in your packet. We did pull the data from Hocking Hills area. There should be some charts there. And we plotted timber harvesting over time with the reservation that we received at Hocking, and you can compare. There's really no clear comparison. If that was really the major issue, Hocking Hills is the mecca of tourism. As we ramp up timber harvesting, you would expect tourism to be dropping as well. Of course, our harvest habits changed and tourism keeps climbing. And also we've reviewed literature suggesting that, you know, timber harvesting does not, if it's done properly, you do screening, you modify certain sales, it really doesn't have an impact on the tourism aspects. So there's a couple alternatives the group laid out there. You know, number one, consider aesthetic adjustments to future harvest, you know, size of area. If you look in our timber management manual, we do have an aesthetic criteria in there as far as how you lay out a sale, what's around a given area. You do certain things in broken landscapes, certain things in continuous landscapes. But it's one consideration. or one alternative that they threw out is better state that we are gonna give additional aesthetic concerns or conditions to anything we do here at Mohican. And alternative number 2, commit to the off-season of recreation when we do any management activities. And anything else you want to look at. Number 5, Division of Forestry should recognize the importance and the value of white pine in the area. Of course, we have a response there. You know, the white pine is native to the area. These plantations are not native to the area. They're man-made plantations. The seed source is not from Ohio, the seed source. Most of the seed source in that time, the pine was really missing from our landscape here, a little bit here in the gorge, but the seed source for our nurseries at that time came from the north, Wisconsin, Minnesota area. So these pines, the seed source is not native, nor is it a native stand. It's a planted stand, it's a man-made stand. But we do recognize the importance of pine. As you look at the landscape of Ohio, Chad's first slide there, it is a component of the landscape, and we don't have any intention of eliminating every pine that exists on Mohican.
I'm sorry, Bob, to interrupt.
Yeah.
My understanding is you don't intend to remove every white pine, yeah, but not even every white pine plantation, is that right?
That's
so
correct.
you're leaving some of the plantations?
And alternative number 1 is clarify this in the final plan. Maybe we should do a better job of stating that. And alternative number 2, identify a percent that we want to keep in plantations. What is that percentage that you feel should be? Should it be 2% of the land base, 3%, 10%? We have 40% right now, so and any other alternative you want to come up with. Hardwood regeneration will not occur. We've heard that a few times in the comments. Really, we know it will occur. There's plenty of, we've done literature reviews. Chad's gone through the literature and looked at the literature that's out there. Dr. Hicks, he can vouch for the literature that exists on whether or not you can regenerate a pine stand to hardwoods or a pine plantation. We know it from past practices here at Mohican that it works. But on the same token, the integration committee said, hey, you know, maybe we should look at working with Ohio State to do a research project to study this over time. Yeah, a lot of this has already been looked at, but hasn't been looked at Mohican through a formalized peer review research project. No, it hasn't. So maybe that's something we want to do. Work with Ohio State and put together a research project to do a thinning, look at what the seed bank is before, during, and after. So that's one thing they throw out as an alternative. And anything else the group may want to come up with on that concern. Invasive species was concern number 7. And we get a lot of input that says, you know, forest management promotes invasive species. You know, we're in a world economy, so these things are here. There's new ones popping up at all times. You can look at State Park, which doesn't do management for invasives. You know, it is an issue. Anytime you have an opening in the forest, whether it's natural or man-made, we're going to have to deal with it. We know we're going to have to deal with it. We have a program to deal with it. We have an invasive section, so to speak, and we put forth plans to treat our invasives. And Mohican is on the schedule for this winter, Chad, so we'll be doing treatments here. The crew of people right now are in Shawnee, I believe, in the south, working on Colonia. Invasives, it's part of management, period. It's here. So we don't really have an alternative, but we're open to suggestions of how you feel that should be dealt with.
I don't see any mention of the fact that a monoculture of white pine could be wiped out with fomizinosis or something anywhere.
That's the reason we put the plan together, but maybe that's an alternative you want to throw out here, and we should better describe that in the plan. Yes, I mean, as foresters, that's inherently, we realize that.
I know you do, but I do not notice that it's been
That it's clear.
really stressed anywhere.
It probably, no, hasn't, but,
Because we all know it's true, but we don't, so we don't mention it.
right, we think everybody else can read our minds, Chad. But no, we know the social out of balance is 40% pine, 40% monoculture. You know, we have white pine and algae hit. We're in a bind. We're gonna have 40% of the forest in serious condition, so, yeah. Okay, but I wanna hold that thought till the end. That could be a good suggestion.
And Bob, I don't, you know, just for being on some state forest lands, I know it's difficult to manage invasives, I guess proactively before a harvest, sometimes is there a way to, you know, I don't know exactly how you would put this in practice, but basically, how do you ensure that you manage the invasives that are in the area prior to the thinnings and the cutting? Because if those seed trees are there, if it's Paulownia or if it's Atlantis or bush honeysuckle, whatever, man, they get in there quick, so.
Yeah.
You know, there's some work can be done before the harvest, not just after.
Sure. If we have it in the stand before we start, we'll definitely treat it.
Even adjacent though,
Yes,
too.
right.
And it should be
That's what
treated.
makes it so hard, is that the private lands, the park lands that really aren't, they're always going to be adjacent to us. So that's what makes it very difficult.
Yeah, we've started working with some of the landowners adjacent to our properties and helping them manage their lands as well, because of that concern.
Right.
Yeah.
And they probably should be managed 5 years before the harvest because of the seed bank.
Yeah.
And then you have the birds after.
Oh, yeah, well.
So it's an issue. You know, we know it's an issue. It's a management concern, so.
Yep.
Chad, while we're on this invasive species and talking about what we should do before, you were talking about this targets that you would choose to be the first pine plantations to be thinned. Is there any place where we describe, or is there a process where we're looking at what might already be on the ground or adjacent to, that says, whoa, we got some invasives over here, maybe this isn't the place, even though it's ideally, it's got too much basal area, we really need to do it, but is that identified any place, or will that be identified?
That came up a couple years ago in one of our certification audits, and the FSC auditor really zoned in on that, and that hadn't been something that we've been like super vigilant at. So kind of the way our new procedure reads is when a forester is doing his compartment reviews or stand level reviews, he is noting and mapping where those invasives are in that area. And so as that unit starts going through the chain, we have kind of a database, if you will, of the locations of where those invasives are pre-activity, if you will. And so then that starts folding into, well, we need to do a pre-commercial or, you know, a pre-activity treatment of those invasives before that activity happens. So just in the last couple of years, we've gotten a lot tighter on that, doing that pre-activity treatment of invasives, and that's all set up in our paperwork and our checklists and forms now. So Forester has to check that box, if you will, that he's done that and look for the invasives. Yeah.
And to Dan's point, how long before the management of the harvest would that occur?
It's about 2 years, Greg.
Yeah, that's a good average.
Yeah.
Can be 2 to 4.
like Dan was saying, 4 would be better, right?
4 would be better, and having a budget where you can hire people that actually manage our property would be good.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
The other thing we've gotten tighter on is just the prompt rehab. So after an activity is, you know, I think it's been shown that when you do prompt rehab, you really lessen the chance those invasives are gonna take root, so.
Carry on, Mr. Chairman. Well, number eight, buffer, we had comment, buffer, I think a couple comments, buffer around the 36-acre Clear Fork State Nature Preserve. You know, most of the, well, probably a little over half of the preserve is already buffered by a state park. Chad, is that right?
Yeah, on the map, it's very difficult to see, but if I can see by everybody. The Clear Fork Nature Preserve is this area right here. So this is all state parkland, and then it's actually red on my computer, but you cannot see that. So there's a 36-acre state nature preserve there.
So to the left is high conservation
So
value.
it's high conservation, so state park on the north side, so there's a no management buffer, and then on this side is high conservation and no management buffer. So there's been a few comments from people that kind of this area is sort of exposed, if you will, of management that go right to the nature preserve.
And that is planted pines right up there.
Yeah, and the whole reason, because the plantation goes right to the edge of that there. So the comment is you need to consider a buffer, you know, around that entire nature preserve, because there's part of that boundary that doesn't have a buffer.
So the integration committee, their alternative number one was adjust the zone boundaries to allow for an aesthetic buffer around the Clear Fork Nature Preserve. And alternative number two is anything else you want to give us on that. Number 9, just expand, reclassify the zone 3A around the Pine Run area. Chad, you want to jump up there and point that out? Might as well just stay.
Liz, can you, it's the brown creek bottom, kind of in the south. Yeah,
orange.
So there, and it goes kind of to your left, yep, that's Pine Run. So the comment is that perhaps 3A is not a strong enough protection for Pine Run. There is some cliffs and, you know, some rocky things going on there. It's a very beautiful stream. There are some sensitive species down there, but if I go by the FSC definition of high conservation value forest, it just, you know, my estimation, it didn't meet the technical definition. So, but nonetheless, zone 3A is a very passive management zone, so, and it's set up in our manual as, you know, for stream side buffers for just this occasion.
So the other overall management objective is the stream side buffer zone area. That's what it's managed for.
Yeah.
It's not managed for timber, it's not managed for anything other than that. So it's really hands off there. So to change that, one of the issues is it really doesn't meet the classification of high conservation value, but it is the protection classification. So it's.
So if you were to change that to 1A, what would, I mean, you could not do that because it wouldn't fit the definition of HCBF, or?
Well, the other issue, there's.
Could you change it to 1A since it's resource protection anyway?
Well, one thing I worry about there is about 4 primitive campsites right in that.
Okay. So you'd have to close those down.
We may not have to close them down, but just kind of worry about, you know, long term if that would be a compatible thing there, you know. Should we move the campsites, should we not? That's one concern there. You know, to make high conservation value forest, I'm looking for some RTE species to be there. And, you know, I don't have a lot to hang my hat on in that area. And that's not to say that they're not there or that somebody won't find them there someday. And of course, then we can revisit that classification. But one of the comments has been, well, maybe you could adjust the boundaries of that to go up the little side hollows. There's a number of little side drainages on that creek that may be just in the mapping, we didn't go up those drainages enough, so that's an alternative too, that we could consider going up some of the little side drainages, to take in more of the steep areas.
And that's actually the alternative number 1 on your sheet. Leave it as 3A, as a resource protection area, but expanded up into the headwaters a little bit more. Alternative number 2 for you guys would be to change it to 1A, high conservation value forest, but then we have the issues with the campsites, and does it really meet criteria for 1A, which is a certification issue. Number 10, financial benefit to Division of Forestry. The motive, people are saying we're doing this as a financial motive. We're going after the money, which is, the response is, well, it's really not true. We receive, of products that are sold on the state forest, we only receive 35%. The rest goes to the county, township, school system. So it's not really a financial motive for us. And, it's compliant. We're certified lands, so we're compliant with FSC and SFI. So we're open to alternatives on that. It's not a financial motive. Number 11 is just, we felt it's a misunderstanding of some of the terms. Just like you brought up, Dan, we see the problem of the monoculture, but we don't state that in the plan. We understand what even age silviculture is, what uneven age silviculture is, what all age silviculture is, what basal area is, and it's second nature to us, but doesn't public, no, they don't. So I think that creates misunderstanding. I've heard that we only think in board feet, so we're only interested in timber, but to us, we know that board foot is just a volume measurement. That's all it is. It could be, if we can use square feet, cubic meters, whatever, it's nothing more than a volume measurement. But the perception that the public sees, they don't understand the terms that we use in our second nature to us. So alternative number 1 from the committee was do a better job of identifying that, hey, here's the terms we use. We use the dictionary of SAF terms and how you can get to that. And if you want to understand what a term means, you can get a good definition, or the accepted definition for the practice of forestry. Mr. Chairman, that's concludes reviewing those documents. Take any questions?
Are we supposed to act on these alternatives as a? All right.
Can I make one comment? Just to clarify what Bob said, these group of 11 lists of concerns, they don't necessarily cover 100% of all of the comments, but I would say they cover in the high 90s. So what we tried to do is be faithful to the stakeholders who commented. And so I read every one, and if it was about tourism, it was a tourism comment. If it was about white pine, to put it in the white pine, you know what I mean. So tried to be faithful to what the concerns were, and this is the top 11 concerns.
And, as you look at the first document too, I guess I should explain that. We put them all down, and I know somebody's gonna look at them eventually and say, we tallied this one 3 times, but actually, we had an extended period, so there's a listing of newspaper articles listed, so some people commented the first go around, then they wrote an article, then they commented again in the second go around, so the same person is commenting 3 times, but we still tallied it the same. I mean, it's 3 tallies, but actually it's one person's concern that was expressed 3 times. So as you see duplicates in there, that's why they're in there. We didn't want to throw any of them out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was gonna make a comment that I saw
Couple.
some duplications on just the last 30 days.
Yeah, I just have one more question, I think, which is relates to the FSC certification and the, well, and SFI too, if they have as many concerns about this, but in the kind of public concern about the management plan, how do they view that? And is that, if there's not, you know, my guess is that you're not gonna make everybody happy, right? If you make some changes, a lot of people just want things to stay the same. How does that factor into the certification process? Does that put it at risk at all, or is that?
Yeah, it's, on the FSC side, it's a very robust amount of indicators that require us, basically, we have an obligation to, especially on public lands, to have a public input process. Yeah, even if we're not doing anything, we still have a process. When we put that on our website, it's called Pathways to Participation. So if anybody wants to know how they can participate, they can look at that. So we have to have a public input process for that. But we also, FSC is very concerned that you've taken all the consultations that are available. So they want to know that you've consulted with the science, the experts, the people that really know. They want to know that you've consulted with locals, local expertise, and then they want to know that you've consulted with interest groups, or people may have some kind of, you know, financial or other interest out there that, you know, your practice is taken into that, and then they want to see how you followed up. Did you really take their comments? All these things that we're doing, you know, we took the comments, we had the process, the input process, and then we try to catalog all this, because, you know, we know that you can't read 150 letters, so we categorize them into 11 comments. You know, here's the top 11, if you will, and then, you know, we have an obligation to sort of take some of that and consider it. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think we need to go through each of these items, 1 through 11, and see what the council feels about accepting it or rejecting it or adding to it. So we'll go back and go to number 1, sports. There's nothing there, I believe, that we have to worry about or to consider. Number 2, I think that my opinion, the division's response about the diversity of its distribution of high-value forestry lands and values that are out there distributed across the forest and to represent, you know, 10% or more of the forest.
I agree with that response is adequate.
Yeah, and, you know, that's one reason why I kind of asked you the question about what did the inventory that we conducted, what did it produce in terms of that knowledge and that data? So everybody's, as far as the council members are okay with the response of number 2? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Any opposed? Let's go to extend the comment period. We did that. Voted on that last time. We voted on that last time and allowed that to take place, so let's move on from that one. Let's talk about number 4, negative impacts to tourism. Having some experience in listening to complaints from the AEP recreation area about activities that the company was doing, I can identify with people's concerns about any type of activity that might impact tourism. But I believe that overall that tends to get balanced with other things that are other benefits that are created by with certain management activities. The alternatives consider adjustments in how we're going to conduct or lay out our harvest and the size of the area. I think that's reasonable and almost expected that you would do that. And number two, committing to trying to do it in the off-season so that we don't have that activity during the high peak of the tourism will also be kind of a one that I would expect you guys to do.
But do you want to limit them to that?
Saying what?
Do you want to limit them to that?
Well, there might be some circumstances, Bob, maybe you can tell us that there might be some circumstances where while you commit to it, you can't guarantee a salvage.
A catastrophic event.
Yeah, a salvage issue.
Then, at that point, then we would be talking about how we're going to do a salvage issue. But a couple of things on this issue. One thing that we did develop last year, the year before, an aesthetic team within the division, which is comprised of some land management people. Greg Hall's on there, Alistair, who's an invasive person, service forestry, private lands people. So we have people within the division that aren't tied to the state forest lands, and that team reviews our sales, and it's called an aesthetic team, to make sure we're not impacting tourism or violating the aesthetics of a given area. So that team reviews every sale that we put out each year. So I didn't mention that. And the other thing is, we're keeping these sales small. I think what's the total sales in this work plan? A little bit less than 40 acres, 39, 38 acres or something. And as two sales are scattered out, so you're having a very small opening in any given part of the forest at any time. So we are considering the size of the sale to minimize that impact. But I should have covered that in the first.
Can we change the language in this one from consider to make aesthetic adjustments? I mean, is that, because considers do that as need, or make as needed, or something like that?
Is that part of the plan already? That's part of your work. Part of your work plan already.
It is.
So it's already in there.
But does it say consider or make in the plan?
Chad?
That gets into the, the activity level. We do aesthetic considerations. And we do it, we make them, we do them, however you want to order it.
So alternative A is already in there.
Yeah, it's a little stronger.
And alternative one's already in the plan, or it's in your, it's in your actual, your management, annual management plan.
It is.
Every
That's what we're
project, your
saying
project plan, whatever.
Is there anything else there that we
Yeah.
could consider, but, you know, we do all those landing areas and size harvests and stuff already.
But we can spell it out in this plan even stronger. And that's part of our land management manual, which is our policies and procedures internally that nobody else sees, so.
It'd be
I think
probably
you're
good
right,
to,
Bill.
make it, put it in the plan, make it stronger, yeah. We need to vote on that, Gary?
Well, let's go to alternative two before we. Well, we can vote on alternative one. We're gonna make them do alternative one. All in favor of alternative one?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, alternative two, commit to off-season recreation for forest activities at Mohican. I think with the caveat about potentiality for catastrophic or salvage work, that might be strong enough. Any other discussion on that?
You okay with that caveat?
Yeah, I mean, you almost have to do it off-season anyways, just because of the number of visitors, yes.
Okay. So for alternative two, take a vote, all in favor of alternative two?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
You opposed?
Mm-hmm.
You want them to?
What? I want them to be able to decide what's appropriate when it's, and not limit them to committing to, a certain time period. You've already taken the vote, it's passed, let's go on.
Okay, number 5. Division should recognize the importance and value of white pine. The alternatives there were to clarify in the plan initiative that it is important and that you're not taking every pine out of the picture, number 1. Number 2, I think that might also be someplace for the language about
That's what I'm putting on alternative 3 here.
alternative 3. So clarify the above statements in the final plan was alternative 1. Want to vote on that one? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Alternative 2 says identify a percentage goal of pine plantations that should remain on the landscape. So if we were to approve that one, I would let you as a division
Well,
kind
maybe,
of come up with that percentage.
if you wanna, yeah, or, you know, you clarify in the statement how you want us to do that. If you want us to consult with the Division of Wildlife, consult with other experts within the division, how do you want us to determine that? So,
Also, I wanna know,
should it be reflect the land base of Ohio that Chad threw up there? Is that the percentage we should shoot for?
What's the time frame on all this? I mean,
This is a 5-year plan, but it's,
okay.
it'll carry on.
It's hard to
It's
make
not-
a
not gonna
statement
happen.
without thinking, you know, what your long-term perspective is.
the reason for planting pines may have been for erosion control, but then it's, the pine plantation is there with an intention of being harvested. So if you have a hard number of, or hard percentage of acres in pine plantation, that means that at some point, you're going to have to be planting new pine plantations.
Yeah, so how long would this goal hold?
Well, it'll hold until the plan is revised, but that, when you do a plan, certain things carry over, so just like the ad hoc, you know, everything's
There's
carried
gonna
over.
be an expectation that it'll carry it over.
It's gonna, the expectation is the plan is setting this up for long range.
So did you have another alternative, Dan?
Well, it's in addition to these, yeah.
But if we're doing 40 acres a year, and we have how many acres of plantation pine?
1,800, and
So
we're
we'll
going
never,
thin.
never get to,
Never, yeah.
get to that.
Depending upon how many thinnings you do,
The
it's
plan
not,
will be revised how many times, I guess, so.
but usually the intent is carried over, which
Right.
the intent is to convert to native hardwoods, so at the end of the 5-year plan, if everything is working right, it's just these minor changes that you carry that forward into the next plan to try to get to the hardwood standards.
What was the state amount? Out of curiosity, remember?
It's 40%.
That was statewide. The amount of white.
Oh, it's 2 to 3%.
Oh, wow, that's good.
Division of Wildlife and Mike Reynolds is, and that's something I've always looked for throughout my career. How much is there? Because all of our state forests have a low pine, Mohican has the most, but how much should be there? Wildlife says 35%. But
In the former ad hoc plan, I mean, their recommendation was that it be between 20 and 25%. But that it not be artificially maintained, so that kind of gets to the issue of so eventually you'd have to plant it, so eventually that number would go down as they senesce. But we're.
It would take a while to get to 20, wouldn't it?
It would take a long time to just get from 40 down to 20.
especially if you're going slowly with multiple thinnings.
We'll probably all be dead by the time that comes around.
And it's interesting, that worldwide, I believe the figure is like 4% of forest is plantation worldwide. So why do we have 40%, you know, I mean, just think of that. I mean, you know, a lot of people think so much of our forest is managed plantations, but it's not. So this is an extraordinary amount.
I don't know about that one now. You think, with all we've discussed, it might be a trap?
That's kind of what I was thinking. Kind of limits things.
Just wanna throw a number out, Gary? I mean, I'm thinking in the 10 to 20, or some people are saying 5.
I'm inclined to throw it out completely.
Just throw it out.
Yeah.
Let's vote.
Yeah.
Well, my question about that, would it be reassuring to the public if there was a number in there, so that they weren't gonna eliminate all the pine plantations? That'd be the reason to put it in, I think. I don't think it's gonna happen, you know, we're not gonna get to a low number in our lifetimes, but
I guess we could put a number in, and if we see as years go on that the hardwood is actually a better option for wildlife and for whatever reason, why it could be, at a revision sometimes it could be changed.
or if we get down the road where, okay, well, it's time to plant, because you want 4%, then you modify the plan to say it's not an acceptable alternative.
My sense of the comments, Bill, is that one, people wanna know that the naturally occurring white pine stands, not the plantations, but the naturally occurring, that those are off the table, which I think they are. And then two, that there's a legacy here that we recognize.
Right, so even just have some of the kind of historical.
There's a legacy of pine plantations
Almost like
here
a
that's sort
history,
of not messed with.
As a guest of, may I ask a question?
Sure.
So I guess, how much acreage of pine plantation is currently in those hands-off high conservation value areas?
It would be about 300 acres out of the 1,800.
What percentage is that?
So that's a fifth, 20%?
20%.
25%, or 15-20%? Is that the number you should use, because you're not gonna touch them anyway?
We're trying, they are trying to get those, you are trying to.
You need 20% of the forest, which was the whole forest 4,600. So there you're looking at about 800 acres, right? 900 acres.
Yeah, my understanding is you're actually trying
forest.
to convert those HCBF pine plantations into hardwoods, right? We don't wanna keep those.
Yeah, I'm just asking about how many acres are in places that we've already set our hands off. How many acres of pine?
It'd be about 300 acres in the pink.
In the dark pink?
In the dark pink,
There's 300 acres in the dark pink?
yes.
And those, you have no plans on converting
No,
those?
no plans, they just naturally senesce.
Oh, I actually didn't realize that.
Yeah, because there's no, we're not doing sort of man-made disturbance in those natural, yeah.
And that
The light
300
pink
acres
areas.
more
I
or
thought you
less,
said dark pink, okay. Dark pink.
Dark
should be
pink?
active.
Dark pink,
Dark
yes.
pink.
but that 300 acres more or less,
Oh,
plus
sorry, okay.
what we talked about,
It's the opposite.
no, we didn't get there
I
yet.
think each of these.
Expanding an aesthetic, or having an aesthetic zone around.
Yeah, we have to,
Incorporate
we
that.
do all that, we'll have to recalculate how much that adds and stuff.
So you capture pine in the aesthetic buffer around the conservation area, and then the 300 acres of the high conservation value forest, then we got a number that we can derive a percentage from.
Yeah, and I don't know what that number is, depending on what that.
Well,
static
when you
buffer
do,
would be.
if you develop that percentage and you state it in the plan that there is 10, 15, 20% pine plantations that are in areas that will not be managed. Well, the management will be hands-off. That would give you your percentage that will be maintained, that will not be harvested, not be thinned, not be converted.
Yeah.
I think it should be reworded, I don't think it should go with percentage at all.
I agree.
Because
That's true.
you have the aesthetic area around the conservation area, and then you have the acres or the plantations that are in, what's our number? The
1A.
1A, all right? It's 350 acres today. 5 years from now, it might be 325. So,
Windstorm goes through and we have a Dow Jones.
right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So plantations in any buffer areas, for example, 1A or 3A, will not be managed.
In any protected area.
Yeah.
The only thing I'm uncomfortable about with that, what if there's some invasive species in there? Well, I would want you to manage that.
Well, the last couple of words on the way this alternative is, it should remain on the landscape. So that avoids using the word manage.
Okay.
I agree. Wordsmithing.
Now read it for us so we can decide if we're ready to vote.
Alright. Pine plantations in any buffers or protected areas should remain on the landscape.
All in favor of that alternative?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I think the intent matters here too, because I was looking at Bob and I'm kind of like, well, then what if you had that storm come through? You have to put it back, so anyway, I'm not.
Either include that we're gonna have a monitoring or some type of regime on what you do new to determine how that works out in regeneration. Or we have an alternative two that says that you will. If this alternative one is a broad research thing that's going to go back in time and then also go to these other sites, but also start something new from the beginning, before you cut, before you thin. You know, that's the part that I want to happen, not that we might consider it.
Yeah, we do, that's part of our policies. We do inventories before we ever do anything, Gary.
And do you
To
do
make sure.
But I wanna, you know, this is what we had when we started, here's 5 years later, this is what we got now.
Here's 10 years later, this
Afterwards.
is.
Yeah, is that something that's clarified anyplace?
Well, it's one of the requirements of certification monitoring, and Greg can speak to that.
Yeah, certainly we do monitoring. It's probably not that prescriptive in terms of 0 to 5 years to 10 years, and there's different ways we get there in our existing program.
Well, you may want to, for the sake of Mohican, have it prescriptive, have it defined. Say you're doing a silva inventory in these areas before harvesting and every 5 years after to show the progress.
Silva doesn't recognize pine stands, I just have to point that out. I know you're an
You
expert
can
on
use the
Silva.
procedures in Silva too.
Yeah, you can use the procedures itself.
Yeah, so it doesn't give you a prescription or anything like that, honestly, so.
No, but it would be the inventory, you're doing a regeneration inventory.
Sure, you can do that, you didn't have to do that.
No alternative is listed as just other,
I think that,
that are concerned about getting invasives in there.
I think that monitoring from 6 will identify whether that it promotes invasive species, and they have in place their plans for treating invasive species.
Well, one point we're missing here too is that actually the new plan allows us to be more aggressive on invasive treatments than the ad hoc plan.
I don't know if this may be already done, but, this would, probably not done. You know, what if you said we're only going to do harvest if we've been able to proactively manage invasives found on the harvest site? So in other words, if you don't have the funds to do the invasive management proactively, you're gonna delay the harvest until you can get to that.
Yeah.
We should.
Yeah, probably right.
No thinning unless invasives are under control.
That's your alternative.
Mm-hmm.
Unless we evaluate and address the invasive. We'll never control. We'll manage it, but not control.
Okay, want to repeat that, Bob?
Liz?
Will not harvest until proactive management of invasive species have been conducted.
Any other alternatives want to be contributed on invasive species?
Is this where you get interest groups involved? You've got all these people that are interested in this forest.
Oh, get them to help manage the invasives?
So, on that alternative, we're going to vote all in favor of
Can we modify the word harvest to
thin?
thin or regenerate the forest? Because we're just not talking about harvesting trees for no purpose. Trying to regenerate these forests.
Silvicultural treatments, is it too wonky?
No thinning.
No, I just don't want the word just harvest. Harvest is the actually cutting of a tree. It's not a silvicultural practice, if you will.
So will not conduct silvicultural practices until proactive management of invasive species have been
That
conducted.
covers, yeah, any kind, thinning, or even
Sure.
if you were to start
Mhm.
some kind of final removal of harvest.
Jargon.
Should be precise though in our
I
terminology.
agree.
Okay, as, read it back, Liz.
Sure.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, number 8 is the buffer around the 36-acre Clear Fork Preserve. And alternative 1 is specifying that we're going to adjust those boundaries.
Aesthetic buffer, does that make it 3B?
Aesthetic buffer around the perimeter.
Does that make it 3B?
Aesthetic buffer is not necessarily resource protection, but it's considering the aesthetics, so you know the landscape when it comes to aesthetics. It's managed, that, whatever you determine that area to be is managed for aesthetics at that point.